An emergency session of Congress has just been convened, and the rumor in the Capitol is that the president could face immediate removal from office. A highly respected investor, who rarely comments on day-to-day politics, has just broken his silence with a statement that is sending shockwaves through the financial markets. Honestly, it's hard to believe he said that out loud. This prominent figure from the business world, who has been notably quiet about the president's recent actions, has just declared that the constitutional crisis has reached a point where market stability itself is at risk. This is no longer just about politics. We're talking about the very foundations of American democracy and now, apparently, the entire global economy. And believe me, when influential voices from the investment community start talking about constitutional crisis, Wall Street listens. Let me bring you up to speed on what has been happening. The current president returned to office in January 2025 after defeating his opponent in the previous election. From the beginning, he seemed determined to reshape the federal government in ways we had never seen before. Whether it was firing inspectors general, replacing career civil servants with loyalists, or trying to bypass Congress on budget matters, the president really established himself as someone who sees constitutional constraints as mere suggestions. But here's where theory meets practice. We are now 3 weeks into what insiders are calling the most serious constitutional standoff since a major political scandal decades ago. Federal funding for multiple agencies has been frozen. Career diplomats are being called back en masse. Military leaders are openly questioning the chain of command. This disaster is unfolding because the president and Congress are at a complete standstill over his attempt to unilaterally redirect billions in appropriated funds without congressional approval. And guess who's caught right in the middle? Yes, every member of Congress who took an oath to defend the Constitution. And before we go any further, let's be realistic for a second. The situation is complex with legal arguments from multiple sides, but the central issue is straightforward. Can a president simply ignore Congress when it comes to spending taxpayers' money? Now, back to the matter at hand. Reports from late October revealed how furious the president was with senators from his own party who dared to question his authority. He labeled the compromise proposed by a senator as a backstabbing betrayal and even went so far as to say she was worse than the opposition party. Talk about strong words. Essentially, the president was calling anyone who didn't fall in line a traitor for not adhering to his exact wishes. And this wasn't a private conversation. The president made sure to air his grievances publicly on social media, making it clear he wasn't happy with any member of his party showing independence. This announcement sent shockwaves through the party because it raised all kinds of questions. If the president, the party leader himself, could turn against moderate members, what did that mean for everyone else struggling to maintain their political futures? Now, this isn't the first time we've seen this. The president's loyalty really only extends to himself. When someone stops being useful or does something he doesn't like, he's quick to turn on them. We've detected this pattern again and again. Just think about how he turned on a former cabinet member right after that official recused himself from an important investigation. The president went from calling him a great public servant to posting daily attacks, finally forcing him to leave office. That official's political career in his home state, once rock solid, was completely destroyed. Then there was another high-level official. The president wasn't pleased when this person declared there was no evidence of widespread electoral fraud in a previous election. Within days, the president was calling his former appointee weak and a disappointment, effectively ending his relationship and that person's influence in presidential circles. And let's not forget how he distanced himself from his own vice president when the vice president refused to overturn the electoral results on a significant date. The president's supporters literally chanted about hanging his own vice president while the president remained silent for hours. Even a high-ranking member of Congress faced a similar fate when he initially criticized the president after that controversial day. Although this legislator later tried to repair the relationship, the president never forgot and was notably absent when the legislator needed support during his leadership battles. Now, it seems moderate senators are on the bench. This is where it gets interesting. This pattern is becoming all too familiar. You can show all the loyalty in the world and defend the president every day, but the moment you step out of line or stop being useful, he'll discard you without thinking twice. So what did these senators do to upset the president? Well, it all comes down to the Constitution's separation of powers. The impasse occurred because the president wanted to redirect tens of billions of dollars in funds approved by Congress to his border wall and deportation programs, while Congress tried to maintain its constitutional authority over spending. Finally, several agencies simply shut down as no one was willing to give in. As the crisis deepened, a group of senators from the president's party decided to take a measured stance. They supported the president's policy goals, but refused to abandon their constitutional duties. Their approach seemed to be finding a middle ground that would give the president some of what he wanted while preserving Congress's authority. At first, the president seemed to be okay with this idea. He appreciates shows of strength and the notion of party members sticking together, but as the shutdown dragged into its third week, some problems began to emerge. Essential government services ground to a halt, passport offices closed their doors, and Social Security offices stopped processing new claims. While the president's base predictably held firm and maintained its position, the public began to shift blame toward his party. Overall, polls indicated that Americans were increasingly frustrated with what they saw as a manufactured crisis. Now, here's the problem. This was the moment when the president started to sweat a bit. You see, the president values winning, maintaining power and public perception overall. He doesn't want to be linked to a shutdown that's hurting ordinary Americans. That's definitely not the victory he's looking for. And then the moderate members of his party went ahead and made a move that, according to the president, was a serious mistake. A senator began looking for ways to compromise and thought she should work with the opposition party on a bipartisan solution. She even considered supporting a continuing resolution that would fund the government while negotiations continued. But then, when the president learned about all this, he completely lost his composure. In the president's eyes, compromising is just a sign of weakness. Working with the opposition, that's pure treason. Any party member who dares to break ranks is instantly labeled a traitor. Let's break this down. This left moderate members in a tough situation. On one hand, they really need the president's backing to survive their primaries. The base will drop them like a hot potato if the president gives the signal. On the other hand, they really have to govern and face voters in general elections. That means figuring out how to keep the government running, maintain essential services, and not look like extremists. The tricky part is that all of that requires some level of compromise and bipartisan cooperation. So they're stuck in a bind. They can keep trying to please the president, which means holding the line no matter what, and that only worsens the crisis and paints the party in a bad light. Or they can do their actual jobs as senators, which means working across the aisle, but that will definitely make the president turn on them. It's a difficult situation, and that's the mess the president creates for party leaders. He demands complete loyalty and wants them to fight without giving in, but then points fingers when things go wrong. He's not shy about throwing them under the bus when it suits him. This whole scenario is causing major stress within the party. If the president has turned on a moderate senator and is willing to publicly undermine his own allies, every senator is wondering if they're the next target. Those moderates who are trying to balance serving their constituents with party loyalty are now very worried about being the next to be discarded. Meanwhile, the most loyal wing believes the moderates aren't fighting hard enough and are too open to compromise. Things became even more intense when the most senior strategist in the Senate, one of the most calculating political minds in the chamber, separated from the president's position. He had been pushing for a more sustainable solution and criticized the president for creating an unnecessary crisis. When someone as politically astute as this veteran legislator starts turning against you, you know you're in a world of trouble. But wait, there's more. The situation took a dramatic legal turn when a federal judge entered the fray. On a date in late October, a judge from an important circuit court filed an emergency ruling declaring that the president's attempt to redirect funds without congressional approval was a flagrant violation of the Constitution's appropriations clause. She pointed out that the founders specifically gave Congress the power of the purse to prevent exactly this type of executive abuse. The legal process moved quite quickly, and the judge acknowledged the urgency. After all, every day the crisis continued meant more damage to democratic norms and public services. And let me tell you, the judge didn't hold back with the ruling. It was a major blow to the president. The judge declared that the president's actions were constitutionally indefensible and a clear abuse of executive power. That's legal language for saying you have no solid ground to stand on here. There's no legal validity in what you're doing. You're just abusing your power. The judge calling out the president by name created a real stir. It's a significant move, reminding the president that he's not above the Constitution. This is a big deal that doesn't usually happen in functioning democracies. Legal experts are noting that we haven't seen a federal court reprimand a president so strongly since a major political crisis decades ago. A conservative constitutional scholar, who isn't exactly known for opposing presidents from this party, went on television and made a statement that really should capture everyone's attention. He said the court's language is unusually harsh because the violation is unusually clear. This isn't a gray area of executive authority. Just think about that for a moment. When even conservative legal voices are saying the president clearly violated the Constitution, and this comes from a regular contributor to a major news network, a former federal prosecutor and columnist for a prominent publication mentioned that if this ruling stands, it essentially tells the president he can't govern by decree. The implications for his entire second-term agenda are staggering. When legal experts from both sides start using terms like constitutionally indefensible and clear violation, that's the moment to really pay attention. So let's break down what this standoff could mean, because it's not just a captivating constitutional story, it has serious consequences for how our democracy operates. First are the immediate political consequences. The president is already facing significant backlash due to the ongoing crisis, and his approval ratings are taking a hit. According to a recent poll from late October, a majority of Americans blame the president for the shutdown, including a significant portion of members of his own party. Representatives are getting anxious about the upcoming midterm elections, which is definitely adding to the tension. The emergency session of Congress being convened, and honestly, that's not the best look for him. Most people in America have a healthy respect for constitutional limits as a vital part of our system, even if they don't always agree with specific policies. The opposition party is definitely planning to take advantage of this situation. They'll argue that the president believes he's above the Constitution and doesn't hold the rule of law in high regard, and they'll have a federal judge's ruling backing up those claims. This is going to be Exhibit A to demonstrate that the president represents a fundamental threat to democracy. You can expect to see the judge's words appearing in opposition campaign ads, speeches, and debates. Now, let's touch on what this means for our institutions themselves. The Chief Justice has been working hard to keep the Supreme Court out of political battles, wanting it to be seen as above partisan influence. But if this case reaches the High Court, they'll be getting right into a political controversy. The president and his supporters are now ready to attack the entire federal judiciary, implying bias and questioning their motives, which complicates things for the court's image as neutral arbiters. However, the judge probably felt she had no other choice. If she stayed silent while the president violated the Constitution, the credibility of the judiciary would take an even bigger hit. This situation puts a massive spotlight on the separation of powers. At the heart of the matter is whether a president can simply ignore Congress whenever he feels like it. If the president gets away with that, it could totally change how our government operates. The founders designed our system with checks and balances specifically to prevent one person from accumulating too much power. Congress controls spending precisely so presidents can't become kings who rule by decree, but the president has always been uncomfortable with those limitations. He craves total control over everything. If his violations are allowed to stand, that's a significant boost to executive power and opens the door for future presidents to abuse that power. So the implications of this case reach far beyond just the president and Congress. It's about shaping the structure of American democracy for many years to come. Every time the president ignores norms, breaks laws, or attacks institutions, he weakens our democratic systems. It starts to make behavior that used to be completely unacceptable feel normal. Think about it. If the president can redirect billions without congressional approval, what's going to stop the next president from doing the same? If he can simply ignore judicial rulings when he wants, what's going to prevent another president from following that example? These actions don't just disappear when this president leaves office. They become part of our new reality, and that's quite dangerous. Democracy depends on those norms and institutions, assuming people in power will play by the rules, even when it's a bit inconvenient. When those norms crumble, democracy itself starts to wobble. Looking toward the midterm elections, it's clear that all of this is going to have some significant effects. We're still more than a year away from those elections, but the narrative being established now is destined to influence how things go. If the story that unfolds is one of the president battling against every institution and coming out on the losing side, does that mean trouble for his party? Voters don't usually reward chaos and dysfunction. They want stability and competence. Right now, the president isn't offering either of those things. So expect the opposition to champion a message focused on restoring constitutional governance after years of chaos under the current administration. Are there people who believe that if you vote for them, Congress will actually start functioning again? They're promising no more constant constitutional crises or battles with federal judges, just good old normal governance. That message could resonate with many voters, including some moderates from the president's own party. And this is where the prominent investor comes into the picture. His statement today wasn't just about politics. Specifically, he warned that continuing constitutional instability represents a greater threat to American markets than any economic indicator. For someone who has weathered every crisis from a major market crash decades ago to a severe financial collapse years later, that's an extraordinary statement. When this investor speaks, institutional investors listen, and his words today suggest that even Wall Street is beginning to worry that the president's breaking of norms could fundamentally damage American stability. So here's the deal. An emergency session of Congress has been convened to address whether the president should face immediate removal for violating his constitutional oath. This isn't just about a government shutdown or budget dispute. It's about whether the president of the United States can simply ignore the Constitution when it's inconvenient. If the president gets away with this, then we're basically saying that constitutional limits no longer matter. That would mean we're entering a completely new realm where presidential power has no significant restrictions. It's about much more than just this immediate crisis. It's about whether we genuinely have a system of checks and balances or if we're just stuck with whoever can grab more power. So keep an eye on this. Things are just heating up. With Congress convening an emergency session and even prominent voices from the business world sounding alarms, we're entering uncharted territory. The coming weeks are going to be crucial. Will party members finally find the courage to stand up to the president? Will the court's ruling hold? Can our democratic institutions survive this assault? The stakes have never been higher, the evidence stronger, and the outcome more unpredictable.